Joining us via Skype from Tel Aviv is Gabriel Sassoon, a foreign media advisor for the Knesset. He's the Knesset's deputy speaker, that is. Thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps you can fill in some of what Jane didn't know. What led to the agreement on this 72-hour ceasefire brokered by Egypt? It seemed to catch so many people off guard. What was happening behind the scenes that you can tell us?
Well, Hamas recognised that they weren't going to get anything out of it. Look, it's like Groundhog Day all over again. I've lost count of the number of times that Hamas has broken ceasefires. I mean, how can you negotiate a ceasefire after they've broken yet another one? They were at ceasefire talks, and then because they didn't like the way negotiations were going, they chose to start firing rockets at Israel as a negotiating tactic.
So let me ask you something about that, though. Is it realistic for Israel to insist that the rockets stop? And what I mean by that is, I think most people would agree that Hamas doesn't necessarily control all the factions that are launching all of these rockets. Is it realistic to think that they're all going to stop? Even if they should, is it realistic to expect that they all will?
Yes, it is realistic. Hamas kept a ceasefire for about 20 months. Look, Rula Jibril, a Palestinian author, said on Charlie Rose this week that Hamas learned a lesson from the Shalit deal, right? They learned that they could get things in response, in reaction to their own violence, right? Israel needs to stop giving. Look, I've consulted for the opposition deputy speaker here. I'm not a spokesman for the government or for Prime Minister Netanyahu, but ultimately my view and the view of the peace camp here is that Israel has to stop giving in to demands of the terrorists. You can't negotiate under fire. Hamas can hold down the ceasefire. They have in the past. They're permitting Islamic Jihad and the other factions to fire rockets now. And I want to remind your viewers that this is not a conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, much as it's being painted that way. This is a conflict between extremists and moderates. And basically what has to happen
the extremists being Hamas?
The extremists being Hamas and the moderates being the Palestinian Authority. What has to happen is the extremists must be disarmed. And just like the PLO back in the 1980s, they need to forswear violence as a tool, a political tool, and then a long-term peace negotiation can take place, not these short-term ceasefires.
So
anymore.
Under no circumstances would you be willing actually to sit down face-to-face with Hamas? Is that correct? I assume not, considering that you call them extremists. Is that right?
Well, they are extremists, but the PLO was regarded as a terrorist group in the 1980s. The Israeli opposition leader, Yitzhak Herzog, and the deputy speaker, and probably others, have said that they would sit down with Hamas if it was fully disarmed, and if they demilitarized Gaza, and if they forswear violence as a political tool. But the former military intelligence chief in Israel said last week that to ask Hamas to demilitarize Gaza is like asking a priest to convert to Judaism. Not quite an easy task.
So an Israeli delegation is on its way to Gaza to restart the talks. You used the term just a moment ago, Groundhog Day, and it kind of does feel that way, that it's sort of the same thing over and over again. Both sides have the same set of demands that they want. So tell us again, what are the grievances? What are the issues that Israel has?
Well, the rocket fire has to stop. There's only one aggressor. It's not both sides, and it's not. This is not a matter of...
In addition to the rocket stopping.
There are no other. The only demand is that the rocket fire stops so that negotiations can take place between the Palestinian Authority and the recognized interlocutors of the Palestinian people and Israel. Now, Hamas can be part of that if they agree to demilitarize Gaza and forswear their charter, which calls for the genocide of the Jewish people, the destruction of the state of Israel, and the genocide of all infidels. And by the way, these are not moderates like the PLO and like Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, who Shimon Peres and others, and the Israeli opposition leader have called a man of peace. These are fundamentalist extremists. Hamas is the ISIS of Gaza. They are committed to the genocide of infidels. Now, and let me add one thing. The New Yorker ran a superb piece the other day, and a Yazidi stuck in the mountains complained, "I don't see any attention from the rest of the world," he said. In one day, they killed more than 2,000 Yazidi in Sinjar, and the whole world says, "Save Gaza, save Gaza." Why the selective outrage? All of a sudden, the world has discovered ISIS in the last 2 days. I mean, where was the outrage over the past few weeks?
Let me ask you something. 436 Palestinian children have died in this last offensive. 436 children. This last offensive, Israel has said, is about the tunnels. How are 436 Palestinian children, how is that consistent with this mission about the tunnels?
Well, you know, obviously it's appalling. I mean, I'm disgusted with the killing of civilians in Gaza. But it just shows you, first of all, I'll say two things about that. First of all, it shows you the cynicism of Hamas in being prepared to use violence to achieve a better deal out of this ceasefire deal. That's what they did. They walked out of their own ceasefire negotiations they agreed to in order to attack Israel, in order to extract concessions, and they knew there would be civilians killed in collateral damage as a response. But let me just say...
But I'm asking you about the actions of Israel.
I understand, and I'll respond to that. And my point about that would be that no war is a bloody, miserable thing. I mean, everybody knows that. 100,000 civilians were killed in Iraq. Over 20,000 civilians were killed in Afghanistan. And by the way, in one of the cleanest wars ever conducted in modern history, the Kosovo War, to save the Muslim Kosovars, 500 civilians were killed by NATO.
War is
including
awful.
women,
No one is debating whether or not war is awful. That's not what I'm asking you.
500 civilians, zero NATO combatants were killed in that war. So, I agree with you. It's an appalling thing that there have been women and children killed in this conflict, and that can end in an instant, and it didn't need to happen. If Hamas had not fired rockets at Israel, there would not have been a response. They want this. They want the killing of civilians on both sides. This is a terrorist group. They're not any different from ISIS.
Let me ask you, do you think the Palestinian people should have a state?
Yes.
Okay. That was a yes or no question, and I got it a yes. Let me ask you.
Look.
Go ahead.
The world needs to unconditionally condemn the aggressors in this point. Like I said, this is not between Palestinians and Israelis. It's between extremists and moderates. These are the extremists. The world needs to unconditionally condemn the aggressors, not the Palestinians. Hamas. They need to tell Hamas the rocket fire has to stop. And then let me tell you what's going to happen. What should happen is Israeli moderates and Palestinian moderates will sit down, and there will be a withdrawal from... There's already been a withdrawal from Gaza, and there will be a withdrawal from the West Bank.
Let me ask you about the withdrawal from Gaza, though. Not a lot of attention has been paid to this. Let's talk about the buffer zones, though, inside of Gaza that Israel still controls. Has there been a total withdrawal from Gaza? And to that point, in many ways, Palestinians in Gaza still say that they feel as if every aspect of their life, politically and economically, is still controlled by Israel. Has there been really a total withdrawal?
Well, look, Israel and Egypt have been prepared to lift certain elements of the restrictions and increase the fishing zone. Look, you have to remember the withdrawal took place in 2005, and there was no blockade until 2007. People forget that. It sounds like ancient history. Between 2005 and 2007, no blockade. The blockade began in 2007 when Hamas orchestrated a coup d'etat in the Gaza Strip and started firing indiscriminate rocket attacks at Israeli population centers. And it's then that there was a blockade, which is a perfectly legitimate action, I think, to take. And that will end in an instant. As soon as we stop seeing these tunnels, we stop seeing the rocket fire, and we see a commitment from Hamas, just like there was from the PLO in the 80s, and just like there is from Mahmoud Abbas, a man who I've met, I've shaken hands with in Ramallah, and there needs to be the same commitment from Hamas. Look, the UK didn't negotiate with the IRA until they agreed to lay down their arms, right? And the same happened with the PLO. The Israelis would not negotiate with the PLO as long as the PLO had in their charter the destruction of the state of Israel, and that they used violence as a weapon of politics. As soon as they said they accept a two-state solution, they accept living next door to Israel, not instead of Israel, then that opened the door to peace. And if Hamas is a very different organization from the PLO. It's not a secular organization. It's a fundamentalist terror group. So, as soon as that happens, certainly they can be part of the discussions too.
Gabriel Sassoon, Foreign Media Advisor for the Knesset Deputy Speaker. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Have a good one.